When I found out I was going to be a mom for the first time, I was over the moon. I still remember the day I learned I was pregnant with Michael. The joy in my husband's eyes was worth everything. "We're going to have a family," he said. Holding my hand, he dreamed out loud. "We'll give him a great life. He'll go to the best schools." In that moment, I believed him with all my heart. But life has a way of shattering your illusions quickly. When Michael was born, he became the light of our home. When my husband came home from work, he would take Michael in his arms and play with him for hours. Hearing Michael's laughter made me forget all my exhaustion. Then Chris came along, our second son. He was quieter, more delicate, like a tiny bird when I held him. I was so excited to raise them together, I can't even explain. But things changed fast. When Michael was just 3 years old, my husband started coming home later and later. "Work's been busy," he'd say. At first I believed him, but over time, his demeanor changed. His gaze grew distant and his behavior turned cold. By the time Chris was born, he was almost like a stranger in our home. At dinner, he'd barely look up from his phone, brushing off my questions with short answers. One day I noticed the kids were starting to feel the absence of their father's love. Michael went over to sit on his dad's lap, but he gently pushed him aside. I'll never forget the disappointment on Michael's face. That was the moment I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't even admit it to myself. Eventually, the truth came out. Mark had been seeing another woman. I found out through one of his closest friends. "I hate to tell you this, but I think you should know," he said. "He's been with someone else for months. That's why he's been distant and staying out late." "Who is she?" I asked. "A single woman he works with," he said. "I need to see them. You have to help me," I insisted. "Fine, I'll let you know. I'll text you," he said. 2 days later, a message with an address came through. I left the house in a rush and went straight there. At the cafe, I saw Mark holding hands with her, and my whole world crumbled. Hearing about it hadn't fully hit me, but seeing it with my own eyes was a shock I couldn't bear. After watching them for a few minutes, I left, crying uncontrollably. How could he do this to us? How could he do this to our children? I've never been able to make sense of it. That night, I confronted Mark. "I saw you at the cafe today holding hands with your girlfriend. How could you do this to us?" Instead of showing remorse, he blamed me. "You don't understand me," he said. "You've always left me feeling alone." That was the moment I realized our marriage was over. He was making up excuses, but I had loved him deeply and done everything I could to make him happy. Clearly, he didn't love me anymore. We divorced amicably. Mark left without asking for anything and didn't even look back. But he left behind me and our 2 little boys. I still remember trying to explain the divorce to them. Michael asked, "Mom, why did Dad leave?" And I had no answer. It was one of the hardest days of my life. Life showed its true colors after the divorce. I needed to find a job, but how could I work and take care of 2 kids at the same time? Through some friends, I found work cleaning houses. I dropped Michael off at school in the mornings, leave Chris with a neighbor, and rush off to work. In the evenings, I'd work at a sewing workshop. My hands bled from sewing, and my back ached so much it kept me up at night. But all that effort still wasn't enough. When Michael's clothes wore out, I couldn't afford to replace them. When Chris asked for toys, I could only pat his head and apologize. Sometimes I had to make our meals smaller. The guilt of not being able to put enough food on their plates brought me to tears every night. I was doing everything I could, working 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. And in the process, I had no time for my kids, only for their needs. As Michael grew older, he started feeling his father's absence more acutely. When I tried to talk to him, he either ignored me or stayed silent. One day, his teacher called me saying he had been fighting with classmates. When I spoke to him, he said, "If Dad hadn't left, this wouldn't have happened." I'll never forget the anger in his eyes. In the chaos, I was just trying to survive and keep my sons afloat. But I know I wasn't enough for them. Maybe their stomachs were full, but their hunger for love from their parents only grew. I loved them so much, and it broke my heart to see them suffer. I couldn't take it anymore and went to Mark. I swallowed my pride and begged him, "Please, come back." Can you believe it? I begged the man who cheated on me to return. "Our kids need you. They miss their father so much. Please come back and be there for them. Let them grow up with their dad," I pleaded. "I don't want anything for myself. You can stay with her, but please show some love to your sons." Even after humiliating myself, I couldn't convince him. "I don't want to. You're on your own now. Don't ever contact me again," he said. I hated myself for lowering my standards for a man like him, but I felt I had no other choice. Chris grew up in his brother's shadow. Quiet and introverted, he tried to follow in Michael's footsteps. When Michael started staying out late, Chris went along with him. One day I noticed Michael coming home late. "Where were you?" I asked. "Hanging out with friends," he said, but I could see the lie in his eyes. When Michael told me he was dropping out of school, my world collapsed again. "Mom, I'll work and help you out," he said. "Son, I can take care of you. Stay in school, get an education, and build a future," I told him. But over time, I realized he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. He got involved in petty crimes, which soon escalated. One night, the police came to our door. Michael had injured someone in a fight. I was in shock, trembling and crying uncontrollably. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll be fine," he said. But the police took him away. In court, he was sentenced to prison. At 18, he went to jail. Chris and I were left alone. Chris couldn't handle the emotional toll of his brother's imprisonment. Michael's absence pushed him further into darkness. When I learned that Chris was following in his brother's footsteps, my world shattered again. One night, I found him after searching the streets. "You didn't do anything for us," he yelled at me. "You only gave us hunger and poverty." "Son, I love you. I've done everything for you. I've worked day and night for you. Don't say that, please. Come home and let's talk," I begged. But he wouldn't listen. "Shut up, Mom. Don't embarrass me in front of my friends. Now get out of here," he shouted and walked away. I fainted from the shock of his words. Strangers passing by found me and took me to the hospital. That night, lying in a hospital bed, I felt an indescribable sorrow. I had failed my sons. I couldn't protect them. One was in prison, and the other was heading down the same path. I couldn't stop it, and eventually, it happened. Michael was released from prison, but he wasn't the same. He was quiet and withdrawn. Chris, on the other hand, was in prison for theft just before Michael got out. I couldn't show them the love they needed. I couldn't protect them. Every night I ask myself, where did I go wrong? But there's no answer. Everything I tried wasn't enough. And the emptiness in their eyes grows larger in my heart every day. Today, I have neither my sons nor my husband by my side. Life has become unbearable for me. My greatest regret is not being enough for my sons. I hope you can learn from my story and be enough for your children.